From Castle Rexworth and the Rexworth Estates, I bid you good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are and whenever you are. My name is Rexworth, Lord Rexworth, and I welcome you to yet another impromptu stream on this Friday afternoon in the Western Hemisphere, and late in the evening over across the pond in the UK and Europe, and gosh, getting into early morning the next day, the further east you head in the world. Especially towards Japan. But welcome in, everybody, no matter where you are in the world. I welcome you all here to Castle Rexworth. I welcome you here to the stream. And going to be doing some more video reacts. I haven't yet decided what game I want to play. I don't know if I want to do Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii again. Maybe we'll do something different. Maybe we won't. I'm really not sure. Take a look at the... we'll take a look at the... Steam library, and we'll find something. I'm actually thinking this might be a good time of year to do something like Deus Ex Human Revolution. Last Deus Ex game we played was Deus Ex Revision, which is a sort of fan remaster remake of the original Deus Ex. Damn sight better than the actual Deus Ex remaster that's going to be coming out soon. And yeah, might do Human Revolution, Director's Cut version. That one was a pretty good title. And yeah, we're just going to enjoy ourselves, going to do some reacts to the news. Might not go so heavy on the politics this time. Definitely going to do a lot more travel videos, and I want to talk cars. I want to talk cars with people, because we do have some car news that is a little bit political in nature, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Also, let's see, as far as UK politics goes, got a video here of Rupert Lowe sitting down with Tucker Carlson. That one should be interesting, and it's under an hour, so it might take us a while. But we'll look at it. We'll look at it. Good news, I know nothing about cars. Well, then, my knowledge should astound you, and you might actually think me the second coming of Jeremy Clarkson or something like that. I don't know. But anyways, welcome in, everybody. Jade Peppermint, welcome in over on the Twitch side. K Double Diz, welcome in over on Kick. We are simulcasting across Twitch, Kick, and YouTube, as per usual. And remember that you can... Nocturnal Nomad, welcome into you as well. Hello, hello. Remember, everybody, you can find all links at on the website lordrexworth.com. Let's go ahead and do all of that here. There we go. All links available at lordrexworth.com. Go ahead and post that across. Snacklefox VT, thank you for the follow. Actually, I need to move this alert window here. Let's move you. Let's get you a bit askew there. Let's see that here. Yeah, that's good. That works. That way everybody can see new follows, new raids, and my golden head of hairs not blocking that. I used to have to really fiddle with the alignment of my model versus the alert box. Whenever I picked up a follow, somebody subscribed, or somebody, gifted bits or kicks or whatever, whenever we got a raid, it was quite a precision job getting the head of my model aligned just so to where you could still see the alert box, but head was sort of starting to peek over that. And finally, not too long ago, I just gave up on all of that and said, no, you know what? We're moving the alert box over to the left-hand side of the viewer's screen, and that way it's unobstructed, and it's, perfectly aligned with the top left-hand corner of the screen, and we are just going to leave it at that. It's just easier and cleaner and just more effective that way. Anglo, welcome in. Maybe we should fund you to get the Great Rebellion on Steam for the Christmas present. Well, that would be lovely if you are so inclined. That may be going forward, at least for the immediate future, the way I afford any games. It's it might end up being, admittedly, a lean Christmas around here this year. Just because fluctuations with the job and whatnot. Anyway, I won't burden you with my problems, and I won't trauma dump. But yeah, probably looking at a lean Christmas this year. Unfortunately, a lot of people are. Those of you who know some people that are really struggling now more than ever, please open your hearts, open your wallets to those people who are in need, especially around this time of year. That's all I can say. Just do it for them. If not for them, then for some sort of satisfaction you get for yourself. Do it for God. Do it for the greater good. I don't know. Find a reason, but please, look after those in need, especially around this time of year. Hell, I could do it all myself. It's 16 quid here, so about $20 where you are. That sounds about right. That sounds about right. But do not feel that you have to do that sort of thing, Anglo. Like I always say, take care of yourself first. Take care of your bills and expenses first, before you go spending money on talking anime people like me. But yeah, all links at lordrexworth.com. lordrexworth.com. Also, make sure that you're following me over on X, formerly Twitter. Change that up because I don't think the twitter.com links are working anymore. But there you have it, everyone. x.com/Lord Rexworth. Please give me a follow. I'm trying to get up to 1,000 followers rather on Twitter. Nearly there. About, let's say, about 20 shy or something like that. I'm going to check my numbers lately. Now we're at 982, so just under 20 to go. Sure, we can do that before the end of the year. But yeah, do give me a follow over on Twitter or X, however you prefer to call it, because yeah, the application formerly known as Twitter. Because I do post things over there, do my fair share of shit posting as well. In fact, had you been following me, you probably would have seen on your timeline neat little picture that I made with the help of AI, turning Rupert Lowe into the Chad meme. I gave him the Chad chin, and I thought that was rather amusing. Well, yeah, apparently the Rebellion is 70% on Steam right now, though maybe it's only on my side of the pond. 4 quid, $7 for you, I guess. I haven't checked it myself, but I'm sure that's right. And Phalanx, welcome in. It's good to see you. How are you? And then, let's see. Yes, for those of you who have not joined as well, do join the Castle Rexworth Discord. Keep up with me and the rest of the nobles whenever I'm not streaming. Just last night we had a little bit of a hangout. Wasn't really feeling up to streaming last night, so decided to hold off, but did have some energy to host a sort of chill hangout where we tend to just play some music and get some travel views of places from around the world. Mostly we just do Japan walkabout videos. Did you see J.K. Rowling, of all people, ratioing Nyara on X? I heard about that. We've got a video there in the tabs. We'll get to it. It's there amongst the myriad of tabs. Talk of which, Nyara got owned. Yeah, when you go up against somebody like J.K. Rowling, you don't stand a chance. You really don't. I mean, not unless she starts babbling on about immigration, which she's historically had L takes on all of that. But anyways, let's get to it. Let us do the news. Casey the Goonette, welcome in. I remember your name. It's hard to forget your name. How is life in the world in the realm of the Goonette? But thank you for the hydrate, Redeem. I mean, let's just be fucking real. We're all, at least on some level, a little bit of a gooner. On some level. Just a little bit, at least. It's okay, how are you? Doing alright. Doing alright. Glad to be back. Glad to be here, able to stream for at least a few days. Before I have to head back out on the road for a little while. And, yeah. Just, happy to be spending time with all of you. And, yeah. But really good to see you, Casey. Welcome in. Always happy to welcome in the gooners and the goonettes from the cold. Anyway, let's see. Where is my window capture here? Let's see. Here we are. Ah, good. You've got the. I see you've got the link there for the Discord. Be sure to join, Casey. Thank you. Right. Let's start with something from Substack, The Dissident, and we've got a bit of a sea change with what we know as the globalist American empire. There's a new White House national security strategy paper, and it's officially calling an end to the new Cold War with Russia. This is big. This is huge, as the president might say. Trump White House just released the new official national security strategy of the United States of America document, which contains the following, quote, American strategies since the end of the Cold War have fallen short. They have been laundry list of wishes or desired end states. They've not clearly defined what we want, but instead stated vague platitudes, and have often misjudged what we should want. After the end of the Cold War, American foreign policy elites convinced themselves that permanent American domination of the entire world was in the best interest of our country, yet the affairs of other countries are our concern only if their activities directly threaten our interests. The document calls for an economic war with China while moving away from Africa and the Middle East and focusing American foreign policy towards South America and reasserting and enforcing the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. Well, there's always an easy and quick way to warm up in the cold. Helps if you're a man, of course. Yes, there's a couple of ways. Of course, if you've got a flask with you, a nice libation, that'll do. Joined your server, ignore my Discord banner. But alright then. The most drastic shift in American foreign policy in the document, however, is its announcement of an official end to Washington's new Cold War policy towards Russia. Finally, the document writes, quote, It is a core interest of the United States to negotiate an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine in order to stabilize European economies, prevent unintended escalation and expansion of the war, and re-establish strategic stability with Russia, as well as to enable the post-hostilities reconstruction of Ukraine to enable its survival as a viable state. Finally, someone says it. They are basically saying it cannot go on in Ukraine, the conflict with Russia. It's causing too much instability to European economies in general and has the potential to go nuclear. We don't want that. And in fact, it is to the advantage of everyone in the world that the United States and Western powers have peaceful relations with Russia, and possibly good trade relations with them. The document notes that the Ukraine war has had the perverse effect of increasing Europe's, and especially Germany's, external dependencies, and adds the Trump administration finds itself at odds with European officials who hold unrealistic expectations for the war, perched in unstable minority governments, many of which trample on basic principles of democracy to suppress opposition. In other words, the rest of Europe is clamoring for war with Russia. They can't afford it. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the firepower. And governments in Europe, not very popular right now with the people, and they're oppressing the people. And the genuine parties that want peace and good relations with the rest of the world are all branded government agents of Russia, and they are suppressed. I saw earlier today there was at least one, I think it was Martin Sellner, who was tweeting about it. Probably find it. Hopefully he's got it in English. If not, we can... Perhaps it was from yesterday. Oh, here we are. Yes, this was from yesterday. Alternative for Deutschland, or AfD members, have been excluded from the election for mayor in Rhineland-Palatinate. A candidate for mayor in this region must now prove in writing they are not a member of the AfD. Germany's most popular party is being treated like a terrorist organization. Roberto Kiefer may be blocked from the March 22nd election because the Interior Ministry lists the AfD alongside Al-Qaeda and Hamas, while violent Antifa groups are nowhere to be found. Germany is a simulation of democracy. Ray Idle, thank you for the lurk. Europe wants to be liberal and still bans trans people from cricket. Yes, they do have a tendency to want to have their cake and eat it too, don't they? The broad policy for Europe laid out in the document calls for re-establishing conditions of stability within Europe and strategic stability with Russia, and ending the perception and preventing the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance. This strategy, if actually followed through on, marks an end to America's new Cold War policy towards Russia since the fall of the Soviet Union. This policy began in the late 1990s with the expansion of NATO membership eastwards. It was George Kennan, one of the lead US diplomats during the Cold War, who warned NATO expansion eastwards would be the most fateful error of American policy in the entire post-Cold War era, adding that it would be expected to inflame the nationalistic, anti-Western, militaristic tendencies, in Russian opinion, to have an adverse effect on the development of Russian democracy, to restore the atmosphere of the Cold War to East-West relations, and to impel Russian foreign policy in directions decidedly not to our liking, and that this view is not only George's alone, but was shared by a number of others with extensive and in most instances more recent experience in Russian matters. Kennan warned that NATO expansion would have been the beginning of a new Cold War, adding the Russians will gradually react quite adversely, and it will affect their policies. I think it a tragic mistake. There was no reason for this whatsoever. No one was threatening anyone else. This expansion would make the founding fathers of this country turn over in their graves. Kennan accurately predicted, of course, that there's going to be a bad reaction from Russia, and then the NATO expanders will say, "We always told you that is how the Russians are, but this is just wrong." Despite this warning, NATO expanded to the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland in 1999, and in 2004 with Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, and Slovenia. US tensions with Russia got far worse in 1999 after the Bill Clinton-led NATO bombing of Serbia and Kosovo, leading to the balkanization of the former Yugoslavia. Noam Chomsky noted high US officials confirm it was primarily the bombing of Russian ally Serbia, without even informing them in advance, that reversed Russian efforts to work together with the US somehow to construct a post-Cold War European security order, adding that the reversal accelerated with the invasion of Iraq and the bombing of Libya after Russia agreed not to veto a UN Security Council resolution that NATO at once violated. Russia played by all the rules, and the West proceeded to break all the rules, thinking they could just do so with impunity because they won the Cold War. You cannot win against Russia. They will survive no matter how much it is scared and no matter how much it is scarred and scorched. Yes, we have seen a sort of testing of the abilities of the Russian military with the conflict in Ukraine, and the best that anyone can hope for is a stalemate. But a stalemate is no victory. Much the same with the First World War. Wasn't so much a victory for Allied powers, it was more just a stalemate, and people realizing this has gone on long enough and this needs to stop. The secret of politics, make a good treaty with Russia, Otto von Bismarck. Yes, so much of all the aggression that we've seen against Russia is just centuries-old imperialist designs of the West just wanting to conquer and loot Russia of its natural resources. Just the greed and desire to take things by force, when they're happy to give them away, but a price, a fair price. As long as you have a fair deal and you uphold your end of the bargain, they're actually a very pleasant people to deal with. But you violate that trust, it can be very hard to get it back. Russia is also the only nation in history where self-described National Socialists will fight alongside self-described communists as brothers, Look at Black October for more. Other nations wish they had the sort of tribalism and nationalism that Russia has. Yes. Yes, Russia is a far more tribalist society, much more diverse society than what is presented. And yet, they make it work. Although, like a lot of diverse societies, they have to go in the authoritarian route in order to get that. The new Cold War ratcheted up even more after the 2008 NATO summit in Bucharest, where NATO officially announced that NATO welcomes Ukraine and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. We agreed today these countries will become members of NATO. All of this was a mistake. All of the former Soviet territories should have just been never welcomed into NATO and just sort of kept as almost like a neutral zone of sorts, or a demilitarized zone. NATO should never have expanded beyond its original boundaries, but at the same time... Anyway, let's see. Sorry, chat, I've got a dog that is going absolutely ballistic over here. Anyway, as William Burns, the US ambassador to Russia, who later became director of the CIA under Joe Biden, noted at the time, Ukraine and Georgia's NATO aspirations not only touch a raw nerve in Russia, they engender serious concerns about the consequences for stability in the region. Not only does Russia perceive encirclement, I mean, NATO expanded eastward right onto their borders, that perception is quite accurate, and efforts to undermine Russia's influence in the region, but it also fears unpredictable and uncontrolled consequences which would seriously affect Russian security interests. Experts tell us Russia is particularly worried, with strong divisions in Ukraine over NATO membership, with much of the ethnic Russian community against membership, could lead to a major split, involving violence, or at worst, civil war. In that eventuality, Russia would have to decide whether to intervene, a decision Russia does not want to have to face. Then again, the only thing I like about NATO is the bullet. I like M4s, yes. Then again, if you wanted none of this to happen, you should have actually supplied the White Russians against the Bolsheviks. So much for the Western crusade against communism, or even just try to avoid World War I altogether. Yes, World War I, that was a classic example of why you don't make too many entangling alliances with people. It just set up a gigantic chain reaction, and once those dominoes started falling, then all of a sudden you've got everybody shooting at everybody else, and you have the entire world at war. William Burns' prediction came true when in 2014 the US backed a coup against Ukraine's elected president Viktor Yanukovych and installed a puppet government more hostile to Russia, which included members of formerly fringe far-right parties and groups. Ukrainian political scientist Konstantin Bondarenko noted, the West, however, did not want a Ukrainian president who pursued a multi-vector foreign policy. That was what Yanukovych was doing. The West needed Ukraine to be anti-Russia, with clear opposition between Kiev and Moscow. Yanukovych was open to broad cooperation with the West, but he was not willing to confront Russia and China. The West would not accept this ambivalence. The West needed a Ukraine charged for confrontation and even war against Russia, a Ukraine it could use as a tool in the fight against Russia, noting that this was why Western politicians, diplomats, and civil society representatives actively supported the Euromaidan, or the coup against Yanukovych, as a mechanism for overthrowing Yanukovych, even as far as providing financial support for the revolutionary process. That's how you got the current president in charge of things over there. Started out as an actor pretending to be at war, and then all of a sudden, he was at war. Oh, thank you for the lurk, W's, thank you. As Burns predicted, the coup led to a civil war in eastern Ukraine between Russian-backed separatist rebels and the new anti-Russia Western-installed government. Well, eastern Ukraine, otherwise known as the Donbass, has always been ethnically Russian land. Actually, pretty much all of Ukraine has been. It was separated out as part of some sort of political compromise during the days of the Soviet Union. But the Donbass region has always been home to a majority ethnic Russian population. So, it almost stands to reason that civil war would be an inevitability, at least in that part of the country. In 2019, Vladimir Zelensky ran on and was elected on a platform of implementing the Minsk Accords, a peace plan that would end the fighting in eastern Ukraine. But once elected, he faced pressure, including threats of violence from the far right, to not end the war, which was backed by the US, in order to continue the proxy war with Russia. And we don't even have the United States doesn't even have the decency to just fight a full-on conflict with Russia. It's just a series of proxies. I see that personally as a cowardly way to fight. As Ukrainian-Canadian academic Ivan Kachanovsky noted, the Western governments and foundations, such as the Soros Foundation, that arsehole again, funded all but one of about 24 Ukrainian NGOs, which initially issued in 2019 a collective statement that any talks with Donbas separatists were impermissible after the head of the Zelensky presidential administration supported creation of a consulting group with representatives of the separatist-controlled Donbas during the Minsk negotiations. All of this eventually led to the bloody, disastrous proxy war in Ukraine, which has been well documented, could have ended in April of 2022 had the then UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson not blocked a peace deal at the behest of the collective West in order to use Ukraine to weaken Russia. There really is a special place in hell for Boris Johnson. Not just for blocking the peace deal, but also for the Boris wave of immigration in the UK. BBC in 2014, Ukraine is the heartland of neo-Nazism. Azov are monsters. BBC in 2022, Azov are heroes. Join your local foreign legion. Purge the Russians. Yeah. Funny how that narrative shifts, isn't it? US policy during the proxy war in Ukraine did not only include fueling the war to weaken Russia, but also involved interfering in the domestic politics of any country that did not want to go along with it. A leaked cable shows the US pressured for the removal of Pakistan's then Prime Minister Imran Khan because people here and in Europe are quite concerned about why Pakistan is taking such an aggressively neutral position on Ukraine. They wouldn't even permit other countries to play the role of Switzerland and just remain neutral. It's like, you will take a side, you will side with us, or we will regime change you. Similarly, CIA Cutouts USA and NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, funded NGOs that got Romanian presidential candidate Călin Georgescu kicked off the ballot over bogus accusations he was supported by Russia because he opposed the Ukraine proxy war and was skeptical of NATO. While much of the damage has already been done, the new national security strategy suggests, at least on paper, that the new American Cold War strategy towards Russia has come to an end. And not a moment too soon. And let's see, this from the Straits Times. More of the subjects on this strategy document. It is described as one of flexible realism, arguing the US should revive the 19th century Monroe Doctrine, declaring the Western Hemisphere to be Washington's zone of influence. It also warned that Europe faces civilizational erasure and must change course. And this is also what I wanted to focus on here. Europe faces civilizational erasure and may one day lose its status as a reliable US ally. Strategy document drew an outcry from Europeans who compared it to the rhetoric of the Kremlin. They just can't seem to help themselves, can they, chat? Ukraine, such a bastion of freedom that any slight pro-Russian Ukrainian politician or citizen had to flee to Russia under threat of being killed. Strangely, the oh-so-evil Russians welcomed them with open arms, granted them asylum. Yes, I believe they've done the same thing with the Boer South Africans. Or at least they were at one point talking about it. The new national security strategy posted on the White House website overnight, December 4th to December 5th, denounced the European Union as anti-democratic and said the goal of the US should be to help Europe correct its current trajectory. It accused European governments of the subversion of democratic processes, including to thwart what it said was a demand from the European public to end the war in Ukraine. The document says over the long term it is more than plausible that within a few decades at the latest, certain NATO members will become majority non-European. As such, it is an open question whether they will view their place in the world or their alliance with the United States in the same way as those who signed the NATO Charter. The EU declined to comment. There was mostly silence from serving European leaders who have taken care to avoid antagonizing President Trump. But former European officials described the rhetoric as shocking, even by the Trump administration standards of increasingly open hostility to traditional allies. Former Swedish Prime Minister Carl Bildt saying on X, "It is language that one otherwise only finds coming out of some bizarre minds of the Kremlin. and described the document as to the right of the extreme right in Europe. He called it bizarre that the only part of the world where the strategists saw a threat to democracy was Europe. Former Latvian Prime Minister Krišjānis Kariņš told Reuters the happiest country reading this is Russia. It is the usual refrain with these people, isn't it? He said Moscow has been trying to break the transatlantic bond for years. Now it seems the greatest disruptor of this bond is the US itself, which is unfortunate. One European diplomat, speaking on condition of anonymity, said the tone on Europe is not promising, even worse than Vance's speech in Munich in February. He was referring to a hostile speech by Vice President J.D. Vance at a conference in Munich that alarmed European capitals soon after Mr. Trump returned to office. The document echoed some talking points of European right-wing political parties, which have grown to become the main opposition to governments in Germany, France, and other traditional US allies. It appeared to praise them, saying the growing influence of patriotic European parties gives cause for great optimism. Natalie Tucci, director of the Italian think tank Istituto Affari Internazionali, I don't speak Italian, so that's probably an incorrect pronunciation, said it showed the Trump administration is in the business of tearing Europe apart by supporting far-right nationalists backed by Russia. This is all they have, chat. They have no argument against what these so-called far-right parties are actually saying. So all they can do is call them far-right, call them nationalist, and claim that they're backed by Russia. You will allow Ukraine to be an ethno-state and commit to forever war against Russia. You will not allow Europe for Europeans. Yes, that's certainly a good summary of what the globalists in these countries want. The new document accused the European Union of undermining political liberty and sovereignty, censoring free speech, and suppressing political opposition. No lies detected. European politicians and officials have bridled at the tone from Washington, but as they hurry to rebuild their neglected militaries to meet a perceived threat from Russia, they still rely heavily on US military support. I wonder if we can find a link to this. I'd like to read this report. Let's do a quick Google search of this. Oh, here we are. I'd happily back Russia and take a check from them at this point, Zed. Yes, I was not entirely unsympathetic to Russia during this whole time. We still need to actually get a peace accord between Russia and Ukraine. But this is promising. This is a good, this is something good. And this will, I believe, have an influence, a positive influence, on Europe and the rest of the world. Because in effect they are saying, this is what we want to see in countries in the rest of the world. This is about 30 pages. We're definitely not going to go through the whole thing. What do we want in and from the world? We want to ensure that the Western Hemisphere remains reasonably stable, well-governed enough to prevent and discourage mass migration to the United States. We want a hemisphere whose governments cooperate with us against narco-terrorists, cartels, and other transnational criminal organizations. We want a hemisphere that remains free of hostile foreign incursion or ownership of key assets, and that supports critical supply chains, and we want to ensure our continued access to key strategic locations. In other words, we will assert and enforce a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. We want to halt and reverse the ongoing damage that foreign actors inflict on the American economy while keeping the Indo-Pacific free and open, preserving freedom of navigation of all crucial sea lanes, and maintaining secure and reliable supply chains and access to critical materials. We want to support our allies in preserving the freedom and security of Europe while restoring Europe's civilizational self-confidence and Western identity. We want to prevent an adversarial power from dominating the Middle East, its oil and gas supplies, and the choke points through which they pass, while avoiding the forever wars that bogged us down in that region at great cost. And we want to ensure that US technology and US standards, particularly in AI, biotech, and quantum computing, drive the world forward. The United States is reinstilling a culture of competence, rooting out the so-called DEI and other discriminatory anti-competitive practices that degrade our institutions and hold us back. Let's see, unleashing enormous energy production, returning economic freedom, investing in emerging technologies and basic science. There we go. The era of mass migration is over. Who a country admits into its borders, in what numbers and from where, will inevitably define the future of that nation. Any country that considers itself sovereign has the right and duty to define its future. Throughout history, sovereign nations prohibited uncontrolled migration and granted citizenship only rarely to foreigners, who also had to meet demanding criteria. The West's experience over the past decades vindicates this enduring wisdom. In countries throughout the world, mass migration has strained domestic resources, increased violence and other crime, weakened social cohesion, distorted labor markets, and undermined national security. The era of mass migration must end. Border security is the primary element of national security. We must protect our country from invasion, not just from unchecked migration, but from cross-border threats such as terrorism, drugs, espionage, and human trafficking. A border controlled by the will of the American people, as implemented by the government, is fundamental to the survival of the United States as a sovereign republic. I mean, good words. We'll have to see if it actually does translate into enacted policy. Because, again, this is a strategy white paper. Still needs to be implemented. Let's see if we can find some more on what they're talking about with Europe. And the United States must reconsider military presence in the Western Hemisphere. The US will prioritize commercial diplomacy to strengthen our own economy and industries using tariffs and reciprocal trade agreements. Let's see, here we are. Asia. When the economic future prevent military confrontation. President Trump single-handedly reversed more than 3 decades of mistaken American assumptions about China, namely that by opening our markets to China, encouraging American business to invest in China, and outsourcing our manufacturing to China, we would facilitate China's entry into the so-called rules-based international order. This did not happen. China got rich and powerful and used its wealth and power to its considerable advantage. American elites over 4 successive administrations of both political parties were either willing enablers of China's strategy or in denial. The Indo-Pacific is already the source of almost half the world's GDP based on purchasing power parity, and 1/3 based on nominal GDP. That share is certain to grow over the 21st century, which means the Indo-Pacific is already, and will continue to be, among the next century's key economic and geopolitical battlegrounds. To thrive at home, we must successfully compete there, and we are. President Trump signed major agreements during his October 2025 travels that further deepen our powerful ties of commerce, culture, technology, and defense, and reaffirm our commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. America retains tremendous assets, the world's strongest economy and military, world-beating innovation, unrivaled soft power, and a historic record of benefiting our allies and partners that enable us to compete successfully. See, since the Chinese economy reopened to the world in 1979, commercial relations between our two countries have been and remain fundamentally unbalanced. What began as a relationship between a mature, wealthy economy and one of the world's poorest countries has transformed into one between near peers, even as, until very recently, America's posture remained rooted in those past assumptions. Going forward, we will rebalance America's economic hard relationship with China, reprioritizing reciprocity and fairness to restore American economic independence. Trade with China should be balanced and focused on non-sensitive factors. If America remains on a growth path and can sustain that while maintaining a genuinely mutually advantageous economic relationship with Beijing, we should be headed from our present $30 trillion economy in 2025 to $40 trillion in the 2030s, putting our country in an enviable position to maintain our status as the world's leading economy. Our ultimate goal is to lay the foundation for long-term economic vitality. Let's see. The United States must protect and defend our economy and our people from harm from any country or source, means ending predatory state-directed subsidies and industrial strategies, unfair trading practices, job destruction and deindustrialization, grand-scale intellectual property theft and industrial espionage, threats against supply chains that risk U.S. assets to critical resources, including minerals and rare earth elements, exports of fentanyl precursors that fuel America's opioid epidemic, and propaganda, influence operations, and other forms of cultural subversion. All of these things the Chinese are guilty of. We must encourage Europe, Japan, Korea, Australia, Canada, Mexico, and other prominent nations in adopting trade policies that help rebalance China's economy toward household consumption. Because Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East cannot alone absorb China's enormous excess capacity. Oh, I think this is it here, chat. Promoting European greatness. American officials have become used to thinking about European problems in terms of insufficient military spending and economic stagnation. There is truth to this, but Europe's real problems are even deeper. Continental Europe has been losing share of global GDP down from 25% in 1990 to 14% today, partly owing to national and transnational regulations that undermine creativity and industriousness. But this economic decline is eclipsed by the real, more stark prospect of civilizational erasure. The larger issues facing Europe include activities of the European Union and other transnational bodies that undermine political liberty and sovereignty, migration policies that are transforming the continent and creating strife, censorship of free speech and suppression of political opposition, cratering birth rates, and loss of national identities and self-confidence. Should present trends continue, the continent will be unrecognizable in 20 years or less. As such, it is far from obvious whether certain European countries will have economies or militaries strong enough to remain reliable allies. Many of these nations are currently doubling down on their present path. We want Europe to remain European, to regain its civilizational self-confidence, and to abandon its failed focus on regulatory suffocation. This sort of talk out of the American government would have been unthinkable even just a few years ago. To hear this in a white paper published by the United States government, it really, talk about a shift in the Overton window. This is massive, and it's very encouraging. But again, talk is cheap. It's one thing to put out a white paper. It is another thing entirely to turn that white paper into actual government policy and enact that government policy. This lack of self-confidence is most evident in Europe's relationship with Russia. European allies enjoy a significant hard power advantage over Russia by almost every measure save nuclear weapons. As a result of Russia's war in Ukraine, European relations with Russia are now deeply attenuated, and many Europeans regard Russia as an existential threat. Managing European relations with Russia will require significant US diplomatic engagement, both to re-establish conditions of strategic stability across the Eurasian landmass and to mitigate the risk of conflict between Russia and European states. It is a core interest of the United States to negotiate an expeditious cessation of hostilities in Ukraine in order to stabilize European economies, prevent unintended escalation and expansion of the war, and re-establish strategic stability with Russia, as well as to enable the post-hostilities reconstruction of Ukraine to enable its survival as a viable state. The Ukraine war has had a perverse effect of increasing Europe's, especially Germany's, external dependencies. Today, German chemical companies are building some of the world's largest processing plants in China using Russian gas that they cannot obtain at home. The administration finds itself at odds with European officials who hold unrealistic expectations for the war, perched in unstable minority governments, many of which trample on the basic principles of democracy to suppress opposition. A large European majority wants peace, yet that desire is not translated into policy, in large measure because of those governments' subversion of democratic processes. This is strategically important to the United States precisely because European states cannot reform themselves if they are trapped in political crisis. Yet Europe remains strategically and culturally vital to the United States. Transatlantic trade remains one of the pillars of the global economy and of American prosperity. European sectors from manufacturing to technology to energy remain among the world's most robust. Europe is home to cutting-edge scientific research and world-leading cultural institutions. Not only can we not afford to write Europe off, doing so would be self-defeating for what the strategy aims to achieve. Our goal should be to help Europe correct its current trajectory. We will need a strong Europe to help us successfully compete, and to work in concert with us to prevent any adversary from dominating Europe. America is understandably sentimentally attached to the European continent, and of course to Britain and Ireland. The character of these countries is also strategically important because we count upon creative, capable, confident, democratic allies to establish conditions of stability and security. We want to work with aligned countries that want to restore their former greatness. Broad policy for Europe should prioritize re-establishing conditions of stability within Europe and strategic stability with Russia, enabling Europe to stand upon its own feet and operate as a group of aligned sovereign nations, including by taking primary responsibility for its own defense without being dominated by any adversarial power, cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations, opening European markets to US goods and services, ensuring fair treatment of US workers and businesses, building up the healthy nations of Central, Eastern, Southern Europe through commercial ties, weapons sales, political collaboration, and cultural and educational exchanges. Ending the perception and preventing the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance, and encouraging Europe to take action to combat mercantilist overcapacity, technological theft, cyber espionage, and other hostile economic practices. In other words, stop the Chinese from doing Chinese sorts of things. And also, no more expansion of NATO. That alone will go a long way towards ensuring a lasting peace between the West and Russia. But yes, very interesting. Very interesting indeed. I'm going to save a copy of that. And I am going to drop that into News and Politics section under the Castle Rexworth Discord. You can read the entirety of it at your leisure. Let's see. Oh, this was an interesting bit of automotive news coming out of the United States. I don't know if any of you are familiar with what Kei cars and Kei trucks are. They are basically smaller than subcompact type automobiles, designed specifically with the Japanese market in mind. You see them everywhere in Japan. They are tiny little city cars, maybe just a little bit larger than a smart car. Certainly a lot more practical than a smart car. And they have developed quite a cult following and fan base all over the world. Now, in the United States, you cannot just get a grey import of a car, a new car, and drive it on American roads. For the longest time, that was not permitted. Any sort of imported car was subject to the 25-year rule. It had to be 25 years older, and then you could get it imported and drive it whatever you like. And some people did that for a long time with other types of cars. You know, if you see certain generations of the Nissan GTR or the Skyline GTR, more specifically, those are grey imports that are over 25 years old. Very distinctive because they were never released in the United States or Canada. Right-hand drive rather than left-hand drive like what you see in North America. And so they're old enough that they're no longer subject to emission standards, safety standards, all of that. Well, the old CAFE standards on vehicle size and fuel economy are going by the wayside. And now it appears that the Trump administration is looking to allow the sale of Kei cars and Kei trucks in the US. The President has tasked Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy to change current regulations prohibiting Kei vehicle sales in America, a move that seemed to surprise even the Secretary himself. The decision apparently came about after the President's recent trip to Asia. During that diplomatic exercise, he described Kei cars and Kei trucks as cute and thought the regulations curbing their sale in the United States was silly. For those not steeped in Keijidosho or light vehicle law, these vehicles have legislatively been baked into the Japanese automotive landscape since 1949. The country's regulations have changed over time, but since 1998, the rules governing what constitutes a Kei car boil down to certain size, weight, and powertrain requirements. To qualify as a Kei vehicle, any car or truck must be no larger then 3.4 meters or 134 inches long, 1.48 meters or 58 inches wide, and 2 meters or 79 inches tall. They also cannot have an engine larger than 660 cc's, nor can they carry more than 350 kilograms or 770 pounds of weight, at least without potential penalties. Now compare that to something small that the Americans buy today, such as a Honda HR-V. By comparison, the HR-V is a battleship, measuring out a full 4 feet longer, more than a foot wider than your typical K model. That said, Japanese automakers have made creative use of the available space over the decades, creating vans, trucks, and even sports cars within that tiny footprint. But there's a catch, because of course there is. For Japanese buyers, there are major cost and logistical advantages to having a K vehicle over something larger. Space is at a premium in Japan, especially in the urban areas, and the Japanese government taxes individuals and businesses accordingly. K vehicles carry a far cheaper tax bill than bigger vehicles, and you also don't necessarily have to present proof that you have somewhere to park it, in other words, a parking certificate, unlike with larger vehicles, especially in rural areas where you do have to have a parking certificate. However, while all of that tracks in cramped, crowded Japan, there are a few reasons you haven't been able to hit your local Toyota or Honda dealership to buy one in the US. Federal safety regulations are the main sticking point with importing and registering K vehicles. Just imagine a tiny K truck like the Honda Acti. That's this little thing here. Going up against a Ford Super Duty truck in an accident. We all know who would win. That would be the Ford. As a result of Americans' love for gigantic SUVs and trucks, the feds, as well as many state governments, have been reluctant, to put it mildly, to allow these cars on our roads, where you see a lot of popularity with these little K trucks, for example. Farms. Farmers love these little things. They are just the right size. They are just the right everything. They're sort of like this little Goldilocks mini truck that they can take round with some tools or whatever they need and get whatever work they need done. It's exactly what everything they need, nothing that they don't. Then there's the sticking point within Trump's announcement itself. The administration notes K vehicles must be manufactured in the United States in order for automakers to actually sell them here. Even dialing out the regulatory hurdles, companies retooling to build such vehicles here, not to mention the big three either scrambling to get in on the action or crying foul that they can't build a small vehicle and sell it affordably to American buyers, will take considerable time. And whilst we're on the subject of American buyers, there's the public's appetite for K vehicles beyond die-hard enthusiasts and space or budget-conscious individuals. There's a reason the big three no longer sell small vehicles by and large. Demand is low, profit margins already razor thin. Shifting regulations could open a door down market for interested buyers, but as always, we'll have to wait and see how this actually plays out in practice. I think the companies coming out with vehicles skirting safety regulations build them with 3 wheels, and it gets regulated like a motorcycle. I have seen those on the roads, yes, and quite often they get classified as a motorcycle. Many of them even have motorcycle engines or the equivalent of a motorcycle engine. And very often they're not completely enclosed either. It's more like a gigantic road-going go-kart or something. But anyway, that's what's going on in the United States at the moment.